I never asked to be born, but my parents, Wayne and Abigail Billy, made it clear from the start that I wasn't planned. I'm Madison, the second child they didn't want. My older sister, Amber, was their favorite, the one they always dreamed of. Living in the Billy house felt like living in two separate worlds. Amber's world was full of love and attention, while mine was cold, distant, and full of neglect. I'll never forget my 8th birthday. I woke up hoping maybe this year would be different. Maybe my parents would remember. Maybe they'd care. But when I went downstairs, they were talking about Amber's dance recital. Morning, I said, trying not to sound too hopeful. Mom barely looked up. Your cereal's in the cupboard, she said. No happy birthday, no hug, nothing. Later that evening, Dad mumbled, "Oh, right. Happy birthday, kid," while eating dinner, not even looking at me. Mom didn't even remember. I thought it was next week. That night, I clutched the only birthday card I received, from Grandma Francesca. Her words were a lifeline. You bring so much joy to my life. Never forget how special and loved you are. I read it over and over, trying to believe it. But how could I feel special when my own parents barely noticed me? School was hard too. Parent-teacher conferences were a constant reminder that my parents didn't care. Other kids' parents showed up, proud and supportive. Mine always had an excuse. Amber has a dance competition. You understand, right? I nodded, pretending it didn't hurt, but it always did. The worst part was at night, when I could hear their cruel voices. Amber's so bright. Why can't Madison be more like her? Dad would say. Mom would sigh. It's like Madison doesn't even try. Amber was reading at 4. Madison could barely tie her shoes. Their words stung. They made me feel like I'd never be good enough. I became quiet and withdrawn. What was the point of trying? The only person who truly cared for me was Grandma. Every time I visited her cozy little house, I felt loved and heard. When I was 13, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. One day, crying, I went to Grandma and asked, "Can I live with you?" She immediately hugged me. "You'll always have a home with me," she said. "One day, everything I have will be yours." That was all I needed to hear. I didn't care about inheriting anything. I just wanted to feel loved. When my parents found out, they didn't care. Dad scoffed. "That tiny house? She works at a library for peanuts. What could she possibly offer you?" Mom shrugged. "If that's what you want, it'll make things easier for us." Their indifference hurt, but it also made me sure I was doing the right thing. They didn't value Grandma's love, but I did. Living with Grandma wasn't easy. Money was tight, and we often struggled, but none of that mattered. For the first time, I felt cherished. Grandma came to every school event, sat in the front row cheering for me, and told everyone about her brilliant granddaughter. I started to thrive. I made friends, joined clubs, and my grades improved. Love and support had changed me. Everything was going well until one autumn afternoon when Grandma came home looking upset. Her smile was there, but her eyes were full of tears. "Madison, sweetheart," she said, "we need to talk. It's about my sister Marilyn. She passed away." I barely remembered Aunt Marilyn, a wealthy businesswoman. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I said, holding her hand. She squeezed it tightly. "There's more, Madison. Marilyn left me everything, her entire fortune. We're millionaires now, sweetheart, multimillionaires." The news spread fast, and it didn't take long for my parents to show up at Grandma's door. One evening, when Grandma opened it, there they were, Wayne and Abigail Billy, looking tearful. Mom, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before, said, "Francesca, Madison, we've made a terrible mistake. We've been awful parents, truly awful, but we've realized how wrong we were, and we want to make things right." Dad nodded, looking humble. I stood frozen, shocked. The same parents who had ignored me for years were now asking for a second chance. "Please, Madison," Mom pleaded, "come home. Let us be the family we should have been all along." I looked at Grandma, unsure of what to do. She smiled kindly and said, "It's your decision, sweetheart. Whatever you choose, I'll support you." After thinking about it for days, I decided to give them another chance. With Grandma's blessing, I packed my things and moved back to the Billy house. At first, it felt like a dream. Mom and Dad were kind and loving. They came to every school event and cheered me on. They gave me thoughtful gifts, nothing expensive, but things that showed they were paying attention. We even started having family game nights. I'll never forget the first time Dad ruffled my hair after I won at Monopoly and said, "That's my girl." The warmth I felt was indescribable. The biggest surprise was bedtime. Mom started tucking me in every night, something I'd always wanted as a little girl. She'd smooth my hair and kiss my forehead, whispering, Good night, sweetheart, we love you so much. Even Amber, who used to be the golden child, started being kinder. She included me in her plans, introduced me to her friends, and gave me advice about boys and makeup. I wanted to believe everything had truly changed, that my family finally saw me for who I was, but a tiny voice in the back of my mind wondered, why now? Why only after Grandma got the money? I tried to ignore those doubts and focused on enjoying the family life I had always dreamed of. I called Grandma often, excitedly telling her how happy I was. She always sounded happy for me, but there was caution in her voice. Just remember, Madison, she'd say, you always have a home with me, no matter what. Life settled into a new routine. Amber, still the golden child, graduated high school with honors and went off to a prestigious college. Grandma moved into a beautiful new house after retiring from her job at the library. I was doing well too, excelling in school, making friends, and even dating Caleb, a boy from my chemistry class. One Thursday evening, I had a date with Caleb at the local diner. I spent hours getting ready, nervous but excited, but when I arrived, my phone buzzed. Sorry, Madison, something came up, can't make it tonight. Disappointment washed over me, and I left the diner early. When I got home, the house was quiet. I used my key to avoid waking anyone. As I walked past Dad's study, I overheard voices. I was about to announce I was home when I heard Mom's voice, sharp with frustration. I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act, she said. I never wanted her in the first place, and pretending to love her is exhausting. My heart stopped. Pretending to love me? Dad's response made me sick. We just have to be patient. Once Mom passes, all the money will go to Madison. If we play our cards right, we can convince her to share it with us. Just think of the life we could have. Their words shattered me. Every moment of love and care had been a lie, all part of a plan to get Grandma's money. Tears filled my eyes as the truth hit me, crushing the hope I had been holding on to. I couldn't stop myself. I pulled out my phone and started recording their betrayal. When I could no longer bear to listen, I walked back to the front door, took a deep breath, and slammed it loudly. I'm home. I called out, trying to force my voice to sound steady. Mom and Dad appeared almost immediately, their faces plastered with fake smiles and concern. Madison, sweetie, you're back early, Mom said, her brow furrowing in what I now recognized as insincere worry. Everything okay? Yeah, I muttered. Caleb canceled. Something came up. Their reactions were perfect, too perfect. Mom clicked her tongue sympathetically, and Dad gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. I had to fight the urge to recoil from his touch. That night, I lay awake for hours, their cruel words replaying in my mind. By morning, I had made my decision. After they left the house, I packed a duffel bag with my clothes and a few meaningful keepsakes. Without looking back, I left the Billy house and went straight to Grandma's. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with my bag, her eyes widened. Madison, what's wrong, sweetheart? I couldn't hold it in any longer. Tears poured down my face as I pulled out my phone and played the recording. Grandma listened, her expression shifting from shock to disbelief and, finally, to simmering anger. Those conniving, heartless. She stopped herself, taking a deep breath before looking at me with soft, loving eyes. Don't you worry, honey. We'll give them a surprise they'll never forget. She pulled me into a tight hug, and for the first time since hearing that awful conversation, I felt safe. That evening, my phone buzzed incessantly, calls and messages from Mom, Dad, and even Amber. At first, I ignored them, but eventually, I answered. Hello? I said, my voice cold. Madison. Mom's frantic voice came through. Where are you? We've been so worried. I almost laughed at the irony. I'm with Grandma, I replied calmly. And we'd like to invite you all over tomorrow for a family conversation. There was a long silence before Mom stammered, of course, we'll be there. Madison, honey, whatever's wrong, we'll fix it. I hung up before she could continue. Fix it? They had no idea what was coming. The next evening, the air was heavy with tension as the doorbell rang. Grandma gave my hand a reassuring squeeze before answering. Wayne and Abigail Billy stepped inside, their faces full of fake concern and affection. Madison, sweetheart, Mom began, reaching out to me. I stepped back, watching confusion flicker across her face. Grandma's voice was calm but firm. Please, have a seat. We have a lot to discuss. As they sat down, Dad's eyes darted around, taking in the signs of wealth. Mom, what's this about? Is everything okay? Without a word, I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. Their voices filled the room, cold, calculating, and damning. The effect was immediate. The color drained from their faces as they sat wide-eyed and speechless. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Then they both began speaking at once, their voices a jumble of excuses and apologies. Grandma raised her hand, silencing them. When she spoke, her voice trembled with disappointment and barely controlled anger. I hoped, truly believed that you had changed, she said, her words deliberate and heavy. The realization was a tidal wave washing over my parents as Grandma delivered her verdict. I had considered dividing my estate among all of you, she continued, her voice unwavering, but now I see clearly, everything I have will go to Madison alone. Their faces fell, struck by the full weight of her words. Panic flickered in their eyes as the reality of their failed scheme set in. It wasn't just the money they'd lost, but also any chance of being part of a family grounded in love and trust. Please, you have to understand, Mom's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. We made mistakes, but we love Madison. We can fix this. She reached out, desperation etched into every word. When begging failed to soften Grandma's resolve, their tone turned venomous. Dad's face twisted with fury. You can't do this. We're her parents. We have rights. We'll make sure you never see her again. Their threats didn't faze me. For the first time, I felt calm certainty about what I needed to do. I'm filing for emancipation, I said, my voice steady. Grandma will be my legal guardian. You won't have any control over me anymore. The shock on their faces would have been almost comical if it weren't so tragic. They looked between me and Grandma, realization dawning that their carefully laid plans had not just crumbled, they had completely backfired. I think it's time for you to leave, Grandma said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. She stood and gestured toward the door. After a moment of hesitation, they left, their defeat palpable. When the door closed behind them, I released a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Grandma enveloped me in a warm hug, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of peace. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Grandma hired the best lawyers to help secure my emancipation and transfer guardianship to her. I had naively believed my parents would step aside once their deceit was exposed. I was wrong. Wayne and Abigail fought bitterly to retain control, clinging to the hope of accessing Grandma's wealth. But the evidence against them was overwhelming. Years of neglect and emotional abuse became the foundation of our case. Teachers from my schools testified about their absence. How they never came to parent-teacher conferences or attended my school events. My third-grade teacher, Mrs. Randy, recounted the time I won the spelling bee, and no one from my family showed up to celebrate. Even neighbors came forward, painting a stark contrast between the extravagant parties my sister Amber enjoyed and my overlooked birthdays. The final hearing came quickly. To my surprise, Amber walked into the courtroom, slipping quietly into the back. When she took the stand, her testimony dismantled the last remnants of my parents' defense. Yes, Your Honor, Amber said, her voice calm and deliberate. I knew about my parents' plan to use Madison to gain access to Grandma's money. The sudden kindness, the sisterly bonding, it was all part of the act. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. I sat frozen, struggling to process her words. She met my gaze briefly, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes, but it was too late. Her admission was the final blow, severing any hope of reconciliation. The judge's decision was swift and unequivocal. Grandma was granted full guardianship, and I was emancipated from Wayne and Abigail Billy. As we left the courthouse, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in my life, I was free. The mansion I now called home became more than just a physical refuge. It was a sanctuary where I could heal and rebuild. Grandma's love was constant, her encouragement, a beacon as I navigated my new life. I poured myself into my studies, no longer burdened by the need to prove my worth to indifferent parents. For the first time, I was living for myself. Grandma supported me in every way she could, offering opportunities one had only dreamed of. But it was her unwavering belief in me that truly changed my life. You can be anything you want to be, Madison, she'd say, her eyes sparkling with pride. The world is yours. Together, we traveled the globe. In England, I fell in love with art and architecture. On a safari in Africa, I discovered a passion for wildlife photography. Each experience unearthed new facets of myself, helping me grow into the person I was always meant to be. But the most transformative work happened in the quiet office of Dr. Lucas, my therapist. Twice a week, I unpacked years of pain and learned to navigate my emotions. It's okay to be angry, she told me once. It's okay to grieve the family you should have had. Slowly, I began to trust again, not just others, but myself. The night before my high school graduation, Grandma and I sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. She reached over and took my hand, her expression tender. I'm so proud of you, Madison. You've been through so much. And look at you now, you're stronger and more beautiful than ever. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. You saved me. She shook her head with a gentle smile. No, sweetheart, you saved yourself. I just gave you the space to do it. The next day, as I stood on the stage accepting my diploma, I heard Grandma's cheers above everyone else's. A wave of peace washed over me. My past no longer defined me. Instead, it had forged me into someone stronger, ready to embrace the future. Looking out at the crowd, my eyes met Grandma's. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I wouldn't face them alone.